I should have come back sooner, but by the time I did, he was already gone. The rain came down in cold sheets, the kind that soaks through your jacket in seconds and makes everything feel heavier than it should. And I stood there at the edge of the cemetery gripping a small metal badge so tight it pressed into my palm. My name etched across the front like proof that I had survived something I didn't deserve to survive. The gravel path stretched ahead of me, winding between rows of quiet stones, each one carrying a story that had already ended. And mine almost had too. 5 years ago on a dark stretch of Route 9 where the trees leaned in too close and the night felt like it was watching. I remember the smell of rain that night too, sharp and metallic, mixing with the panic in my chest as everything spun out of control. I remember thinking that was it, that whatever mistakes I had made had finally caught up with me, and then I remember a voice, calm in a way that didn't belong in chaos, telling me to stay awake, telling me not to give up, and I remember the dog, strong and steady, pulling at me like it refused to let go, like it had decided I wasn't allowed to disappear just yet. I had promised him, the man behind that voice, that I would come back, that I would say thank you, that I would be someone worth saving, but promises are easy when you're lying in a hospital bed and everything feels like a second chance. They get harder when life starts moving again, when distance becomes an excuse, when silence feels safer than facing what you owe. The wind picked up, pushing the rain sideways as I walked deeper into the cemetery. My boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, each step slower than the last like something inside me already knew what I was about to find. I reached the far end of the hill where the newer stones stood in neat rows, names still sharp against the gray, dates too close together, and that's when I saw it, Callahan Jack, the letters carved clean and permanent, the years beneath them telling a story I hadn't been there to witness. My chest tightened, not from the cold but from something heavier, something that had been building ever since I made the decision to come back. I stepped closer, the badge in my hand suddenly feeling like it weighed 10 pounds instead of a few ounces, like it carried every moment I had chosen not to return. And then I noticed the shape at the base of the grave, at first just a dark outline against the wet grass. But then it moved, barely, and I felt my breath catch as recognition hit me harder than anything else that morning. Black and tan fur-soaked. Through, body thin but steady, eyes open and fixed on the stone like nothing else in the world existed. Rex. I said his name before I could stop myself, and his ears twitched just enough to tell me he heard. But he didn't get up, didn't come toward me, just stayed there like he had been waiting for someone who wasn't me. And in that moment I realized something that settled deep in my chest, heavier than the rain, heavier than the past. I hadn't just come back too late to say thank you. I had come back to find out whether I deserved to be here at all. I stood there longer than I should have, the rain dripping off my hair, running down the back of my neck, but I barely felt it, because Rex had not taken his eyes off me once. Not when I said his name. Not when I shifted my weight in the mud. Not even when I took a small step closer like I was testing something fragile that might break if I moved too fast. His body stayed low, tense in a way that was not aggressive but certain, like he had made a decision long before I showed up and he was not about to change it now. I swallowed hard and crouched slightly, lowering myself to his level the way I had seen Jack do that night years ago. Slow, deliberate, no sudden moves. "It is me," I said quietly, even though I knew that was not the point, because to him I was not the man from that night. I was the man who never came back. The wind shifted and carried the smell of wet grass and old stone, and for a second it felt like time folded in on itself, like I was standing between who I used to be and who I was supposed to become, and neither version felt right. Rex blinked once, slow, but he did not move, did not soften, and I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the badge again, holding it out in front of me like it meant something, like it could explain the years I had stayed away. "He helped me earn this," I said, my voice catching just enough to remind me how little that mattered now. The metal felt heavier than it had a minute ago, like it carried every mile I had put between myself and this place. Every excuse I had told myself about why I could not come back sooner. I took another step, just one, and that was enough. Rex rose to his feet in a single smooth motion, not rushing, not barking, just placing himself directly between me and the headstone again. His posture straight despite the way his ribs showed through his soaked coat. His eyes locked on mine, with a kind of clarity that made it impossible to look away, and I stopped immediately, hands raised slightly, not in fear but in understanding. "Okay?" I whispered, nodding more to myself than to him. I get it. The rain softened for a moment, falling into a steady rhythm that filled the silence between us, and I stayed there, a few feet from the grave, close enough to read the name carved into it, far enough that I had not earned the right to stand beside it. My legs felt unsteady as I slowly lowered myself down to the ground, the mud soaking through my jeans, but I did not care because standing did not feel right anymore. Not here, not like this. I set the badge carefully in the grass in front of me. Not on the grave, not yet, just close enough that it felt like a beginning instead of an apology. Rex watched every movement, his breathing slow, measured, like he was waiting for something more than words, and for the first time since I arrived, I realized that maybe this was never about saying thank you. Maybe it was about proving that I understood what that thank you was supposed to cost. The wind picked up again, carrying a distant rumble of thunder, and I let out a breath I had been holding for 5 years. I should have come back, I said, not to the stone, not even to the dog, but to the version of myself that had walked away, and as the words settled into the quiet space between us, Rex did not move, but he did not turn away either, and somehow that felt like the first answer I had been given. I did not know how long I stayed there, kneeling in the cold mud with the rain soaking through everything, but time felt different in that place, slower, heavier, like every second carried weight it did not have anywhere else, and Rex still had not moved, not closer, not farther, just standing between me and the grave like a quiet reminder that some distances are not measured in feet but in choices. I let my hands rest on my thighs, open, empty, nothing to offer but the truth I had avoided for years, and that truth did not come out all at once. It came in pieces, uneven, uncomfortable. I was not ready to face him, I said, my voice low, almost lost under the sound of the rain. I told myself I would come back when I had something to show for it, something that proved I was not the same man he pulled out of that wreck. I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my chest for 5 years. But the more time passed, the harder it got. The words sounded smaller than they should have, like excuses shrinking under their own weight, and Rex tilted his head just slightly, not in confusion, not in curiosity, but in a way that made it feel like he was listening without accepting, and that was worse, because silence leaves you alone with everything you have not said. I glanced at the headstone again, at the dates carved into it, at the space between them that held an entire life I had not been there to witness. Did he come here every day? I asked, not expecting an answer, but needing to say it out loud. The wind carried the question away, leaving only the steady rhythm of rain in its place, and something about that silence pushed me further. Did he wait? I swallowed hard, the question catching in my throat because I already knew the answer. Not in facts, not in words, but in the way Rex refused to leave, in the way he stood guard like this place was the only thing left that mattered. I shifted slightly, feeling the cold seep deeper into my bones, but I did not stand because standing felt like leaving, and I had done enough of that. I thought surviving was enough. I admitted, my voice steadier now, not because it was easier to say, but because there was no point hiding from it anymore. I thought building a life meant I did not have to look back. I let my eyes close for a moment, the rain hitting my face, mixing with something warmer. But I was wrong. The words settled between me and the grave like something final, something that could not be taken back, and for the first time since I arrived, Rex moved, just a single step forward, not toward me, not away from the grave, but enough to shift his stance, enough to break the stillness that had held us. There, my breath caught, not because it meant forgiveness, but because it meant something had changed, even if it was small, even if it was only the beginning of something I did not yet understand. I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked this time, at the lines of age in his posture, at the quiet strength that had not faded despite everything, and I realized that he had been here through all of it, through every day I had chosen not to return, through every moment Jack had stood alone. And that realization settled deeper than anything else, heavier than guilt, heavier than regret, because it meant I was not just late. I had been absent when it mattered most. The thunder rolled faintly in the distance, and I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. I do not expect you to trust me, I said, my voice firm despite the weight behind it. I would not either. Rex held my gaze, unblinking, steady, and for a long moment neither of us moved. But the space between us did not feel the same anymore. It felt thinner, like something unseen had shifted just enough to let a different kind of silence take its place. Not empty, not closed, but waiting, and I realized that maybe this was how it started. Not with forgiveness, not with acceptance, but with the willingness to stay where you once chose to leave. The rain began to ease, not stopping completely but softening into a steady whisper that made everything feel quieter. Like the world itself was lowering its voice out of respect for the place we stood in. And I stayed there on my knees, not because I had to anymore, but because getting up felt like breaking something fragile that had only just started to exist between me and that grave, between me and the dog who had not left it. Rex shifted his weight again. A small movement, but this time it was different, less rigid, less like a wall and more like a line that could move if given a reason. I noticed it because I was looking for anything, any sign that I was not completely unwelcome, and that was when something caught my eye near the base of the headstone, partially hidden by wet grass and mud, a worn piece of leather, darkened by time and rain. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to cross the space Rex was guarding, and I saw it clearly then, an old leash, the kind used for training, sturdy, practical, not decorative, the handle looped neatly as if it had been placed there on purpose. Not dropped, not forgotten, placed like someone had left it behind with intention. My chest tightened again. But this time it was not just regret, it was curiosity mixed with something deeper. Something that felt like a thread being pulled. I looked at Rex, then back at the leash, and something clicked in a way that made my breath catch. "He kept coming here with you," I said. Quietly, more statement than question, and Rex's ears flicked once. Subtle but undeniable. I shifted my weight forward just a fraction, testing that invisible boundary again, and he did not step in front of me this time. He only watched, steady, alert, waiting, and that waiting felt different now, not like rejection but like a condition. Like there was something I had to understand before I could move any closer. I reached out slowly, not toward the grave, not toward him, but toward the leash, my hand hovering just above it as if I needed permission for even that. Rex's gaze sharpened, not aggressive, but focused, and I paused, letting the moment stretch, letting him decide, because for once I was not trying to take something before I had earned it. The wind moved through the trees behind us, carrying a low rustle that filled the silence, and then, slowly Rex lowered his head just a fraction. Not a full movement, not an invitation, but enough, just enough. I let my fingers close around the leather, feeling how worn it was, how many times it must have been held, how many days it had been carried here and back again, and something about that simple object hit harder than anything else because it meant routine, it meant loyalty, it meant that even after everything Jack had lost, he had still come here, still shown up, still stayed. I pulled the leash closer, holding it in both hands now, and I could almost see it, the two of them walking the same path, rain or shine, day after day, a promise kept without words, and I had not been part of that. I had not even known. The realization settled deep, but it did not crush me the way it had before. It steadied me, gave the weight somewhere to go. I looked at Rex again, really looked, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw something shift in his expression, not warmth, not acceptance, but recognition, like he was starting to see not just who I had been, but who I might be willing to become. I tightened my grip on the leash slightly, grounding myself in something real, something earned through time and presence, not promises. "I am not leaving," I said quietly, not as a plea, not as an apology, but as a decision, and the words felt different as soon as they left my mouth, heavier, more solid, because this time they were not about the past. They were about what came next. Rex held my gaze for a long moment, the rain soft around us, the world quiet and waiting, and then he did something small, almost unnoticeable, but it changed everything. He stepped aside, not far, not completely, but enough to reveal a clear path to the headstone. And I knew in that instant that this was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something just as important. It was a chance. I did not move right away even after Rex stepped aside, because something about that small shift felt bigger than anything that had happened since I arrived. Like I had just been given something I did not deserve but could not refuse. And for a second I stayed exactly where I was, kneeling in the wet grass with the leash still in my hands, letting the weight of that moment settle, because I knew this was not just a step forward. It was a line I had to cross carefully, honestly, or not at all. I drew in a slow breath, the air cool and damp in my lungs, and then I leaned forward, closing the distance 1 inch at a time, not rushing, not assuming, just moving with the same quiet respect I had seen Jack carry that night years ago. The headstone came fully into view now, the letters carved clean and steady, Jack Callahan. A name that had once been a voice in the dark telling me to hold on. Now reduced to something silent and permanent, I swallowed hard and reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the stone, and the contact sent something through me that I was not prepared for. Not pain, not exactly, but a kind of clarity that stripped away every excuse I had ever made. I let my hand rest there, steadying myself, grounding in something real, something I could not avoid anymore. "I made it," I said quietly, the words feeling both small and heavy at the same time. I just did not make it back in time. The truth of it hung in the air, simple and unchangeable, and I let my head drop slightly, my forehead almost touching the stone as the rain continued to fall around us, softer now, like the storm had already said what it needed to say. I could feel Rex behind me, not close enough to touch, but not distant either, his presence steady, watchful, and for the first time it did not feel like a barrier. It felt like something else, something closer to accountability, like I was not alone in this moment, like someone was still there to witness whether I meant what I said. I shifted my weight and carefully placed the badge at the base of the headstone, not as an offering, not as payment, but as something honest, something that belonged there whether I deserved to place it or not. The metal caught a bit of light even through the gray sky, a small reflection against the stone, and I stared at it for a moment, remembering the night everything changed, the night I had been given a second chance I did nothing to earn. "You told me to be better?" I continued, my voice steadier now, not because the words were easier, but because I had stopped trying to protect myself from them, and I thought that meant leaving everything behind, including you. I let out a breath that trembled just slightly. I see now that I was wrong. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full, filled with everything I had not said for years, everything I had avoided until there was no more avoiding left. I stayed there like that, hand on the stone, knees in the mud, letting the truth settle into something solid, something I could not walk away from again, and after a while I felt movement behind me, slow and deliberate, Rex stepping closer, not rushing, not hesitating, just closing the space between us until I could feel the warmth of him through the cold air. I did not turn right away, I did not reach back, because this was not about taking comfort, it was about being present, about staying where I had once chosen to leave. But then I felt it, light but unmistakable, the brush of his shoulder against my arm, and it stopped me in a way nothing else had. Not because it was dramatic, not because it erased anything, but because it did not forgive, it did not forget, it simply acknowledged. And in that quiet contact I understood something that had taken me too long to learn, that being allowed to stand here was not the end of what I owed, it was only the beginning of what I had to become. I stayed like that longer than I realized, my hand still resting against the cold stone, Rex pressed lightly against my side, the rain easing into a soft mist that clung to everything, and for the first time since I arrived, the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like something I was finally learning how to sit with, not escape from. My fingers traced the edge of the carved letters slowly, as if memorizing them could somehow make up for the years I had missed. But deep down I knew memory was not the same as presence, and that was the part that mattered. I pulled my hand back carefully and sat back on my heels, the leash still looped in my other hand, worn leather against my skin, a quiet reminder that someone had shown up here day after day without needing recognition, without needing thanks, just because it was the right thing to do. I looked out across the cemetery, rows of stones stretching out in every direction, each one marking a story that had ended, and I wondered how many people had stood where I was standing now, wishing they had said something sooner, wishing they had come back before it was too late. The thought settled deep, but it did not overwhelm me the way it had before. It steadied me, gave me something clear to hold on to. I turned slightly, glancing down at Rex, really taking in the way he stood, the way he carried himself despite the years that had clearly worn him down. His coat thinner than I remembered, his stance not as sharp, but his eyes still steady, still certain, still carrying that same quiet strength I had seen the night everything changed. "You stayed?" I said softly, not as a question, not as praise, just an acknowledgement of something undeniable. His ears shifted slightly at the sound of my voice, but he did not move away, and that small stillness felt like trust in its earliest form, fragile and unspoken. I looked back at the headstone and then at the badge resting at its base, the two things side by side, one representing the man who had given me a second chance, the other representing what I had done with it, and for the first time, I saw them clearly together, not separate, not disconnected, but linked in a way I had been too afraid to face before. I took a slow breath and stood carefully, my legs stiff from the cold and the time spent. Kneeling, but I did not step away. I stayed right there, just a few feet from the grave, close enough to feel its presence, far enough to remember why I had to earn my place there. Rex watched me closely as I rose, his gaze tracking every movement, not with suspicion now, but with a kind of quiet awareness, like he was measuring what I would do next. And I understood that this moment mattered more than anything I had said so far, because words had already failed once, and this time it had to be different. I glanced down at the leash in my hand and then back at him, the connection between the two impossible to ignore. I do not know if I can make up for it, I admitted, my voice steady but honest. But I am not going to walk away again. The words felt heavier than anything I had said before, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple, and simple promises are harder to break when you finally understand what they mean. Rex held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unchanged but not closed, and then, slowly, he took a step forward, not toward the grave this time, not back into position as a guard, but toward me, closing the space between us in a way that felt deliberate, like a decision made after careful thought. He stopped just within reach, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him again. But he did not press against me this time. He simply stood there, waiting, and I realized that this was not about him following me. It was about whether I was willing to stand still long enough to be someone worth following. The wind moved gently through the trees above us, carrying the faint sound of distant thunder fading away, and I tightened my grip on the leash just slightly, not pulling, not claiming, just holding on to something that represented everything I had yet to prove. And as I looked from Rex to the headstone and back again, I understood that leaving this place would not mean the end of anything. It would only mark the beginning of whether I could carry this moment with me beyond the gates, or if I would lose it the second I stepped away. The silence stretched between us, not empty but full of something I could not rush, and I realized that every instinct I had before this moment had been about moving, about fixing, about saying the right thing and then leaving before the weight of it settled, but none of that belonged here, not anymore, so I stayed exactly where I was, the leash still in my hand, the rain now nothing more than a faint mist that clung to my sleeves and cooled my skin, and Rex did not look away. His eyes steady, patient in a way that made time feel slower, more deliberate, like every second was being measured against something I could not see. I glanced back at the headstone, at the badge resting at its base, and something inside me shifted again, quieter this time, less like a sudden realization and more like a steady understanding taking root. He did not ask for anything in return? I said, my voice low, almost to myself. He just showed up. The words settled into the space around us, simple and undeniable, and I felt the truth of them settle deeper than anything else I had said so far, because that was the part one had missed, not the rescue, not the moment everything changed, but everything that came after, the consistency, the quiet, commitment, the decision to stay when it would have been easier not to. I looked down at the leash again, running my fingers along the worn edges, imagining how many mornings it had been picked up, how many steps it had taken along this same path, and I realized that what I held in my hand was not just a tool, it was a record, a history of every day Jack had chosen to come back, and every day I had chosen not to. The contrast settled heavily, but it did not break me. It grounded me, gave me something clear to measure myself against. I took a slow breath and shifted my stance slightly, not stepping away, just adjusting, making space for something new instead of retreating from what was already there. Rex watched the movement carefully, his posture still calm but attentive, like he was waiting to see if I would fall back into old patterns or finally move forward in a way that mattered. I met his gaze and held it, not challenging, not asking, just steady. I am going to come back, I said, the words simple but deliberate. Not once, not when it is convenient, but every time it matters. I paused, letting the meaning of that settle fully before continuing. Even if it is just standing here. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and something cleaner beneath it, and for a moment everything felt still in a different way, not paused, not waiting, but balanced, like something had shifted into place. Rex did not react immediately, and I did not expect him to, because trust is not built in a single moment, it is built in what comes after, in what is repeated when no one is watching. I let the silence sit between us. Again, but this time it felt different, less like judgment and more like space. Space to prove something instead of just say it. After a long moment, Rex moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just a single step closer, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of me. His eyes level with mine, steady, searching, and I held still, not reaching out, not forcing anything, just letting him decide. His nose lowered slightly, brushing against the leash in my hand, then lifting again, his gaze returning to mine, and in that small, quiet action, I understood something that did not need words. He was not following me yet. He was not choosing me yet, but he was no longer standing apart from me either, and that difference, subtle as it was, felt like the beginning of something I had not earned but had been given the chance to become. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing just enough to remind me how tightly I had been holding everything. And I nodded once, more to myself than to him, because I finally understood what came next was not about leaving with him. It was about returning for him, again and again, until the space between who I had been and who I needed to be no longer existed. And as I stood there with the leash in my hand and the weight of that promise settling into something real, I realized that this place was no longer just where I had come to say goodbye. It was where I had come to learn how to stay. The air felt different now, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. As if something unseen had shifted the moment I stopped trying to fix the past and started accepting what it required from me instead, and I stood there with Rex just a few feet away. The leash still looped loosely in my hand, not pulling, not claiming, just holding on to the possibility of something that had not fully formed yet. I glanced one last time at the headstone, at the badge resting quietly against the stone, and I knew I could not stay there forever, not because I wanted to leave, but because staying meant nothing if I could not carry that same presence beyond the cemetery gates. I took a slow step back, testing the moment the same way I had tested every step before, careful, deliberate, and Rex did not move to block me this time. He did not shift back into position or retreat to the base of the grave. He simply watched, his eyes following me with that same steady focus, and I felt it again, that sense of being measured, not judged, just observed, as if what I did next mattered more than anything I had said so far. I turned slightly, just enough to face the path that led out of the cemetery. The gravel damp and dark beneath the fading mist, and for a second I hesitated because this was the moment that would define everything. Leaving had always been easy for me. Walking away had always been the part one knew how to do without thinking. But this time it felt different. This time leaving was not about escape, it was about whether I would come back. I tightened my grip on the leash just slightly, grounding myself in that thought, and then I took another step forward, away from the grave, not fast, not certain, just enough to create space, and I heard it. The faint sound of movement behind me, soft against the wet ground. I stopped immediately, not turning right away, not wanting to assume, and the silence that followed stretched just long enough to make my chest tighten again. But then it came, another step, closer this time, and I exhaled slowly before turning my head just enough to see him. Rex had moved, not back to the grave, not holding his place as a guard, but following, one step behind me, his posture still steady, still cautious, but no longer fixed to that single spot, and something about that simple movement hit deeper than anything else had, because it was not obedience, it was not attachment, it was a decision. I did not speak right away. I did not call to him or reach out, because this was not something to rush or claim. This was something to respect. I turned fully now, facing him, and we stood there for a moment, the distance between us smaller than it had ever been, the path ahead quiet and open, and I saw it clearly in his eyes, not trust, not yet, but willingness, the kind that does not come from words but from what comes after them. I nodded once, a small, steady movement, and then I turned back toward the path, taking another step forward, and this time I did not need to listen for confirmation. I felt it, the presence just behind me, not close enough to touch, not far enough to disappear, and as we moved together toward the edge of the cemetery, I realized something I had not allowed myself to believe until now, that maybe this was not about replacing what had been lost, not about stepping into a role that could never be filled, but about continuing something that had not ended. The wind moved gently through the trees as we reached the gate, the world beyond it quiet, ordinary, untouched by everything that had just changed, and I paused there for a moment, one foot on the gravel path, the other on the worn ground of the cemetery, and I understood that crossing that line meant carrying everything with me, not leaving it behind. I stepped forward, out onto the path, and after a brief pause, Rex followed, his movement steady, deliberate, and I knew then that this was not the end of anything. It was the first step of something I would have to prove every single day, because following me once did not mean he would follow me tomorrow, and as we walked away from the only place he had refused to leave, I realized the real question was not whether he would stay with me, but whether I would become someone worth staying for. The road outside the cemetery felt longer than it should have, stretching out in quiet gray lines beneath a sky that had not fully cleared, and I walked it slowly, not because I was tired, but because I was aware of every step now, aware of what it meant to keep moving forward without leaving anything behind. Rex stayed just behind me, his presence steady, not crowding, not drifting, just there, and that alone changed the way the world felt around me, like I was no longer walking away from something, but carrying it with me. I glanced back once, just once, the gate of the cemetery already a few yards behind us, the rows of stones barely visible through the mist, and I felt that pull again, that instinct to return, to stay where everything had finally made sense, but I knew better now. Staying in one place was not the same as honoring it. Honoring it meant coming back again and again, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. I faced forward again, tightening my grip on the leash without using it, letting it rest in my hand as a reminder instead of a command. The town ahead was quiet, small houses lining the street, a few porch lights still on despite the daylight. Everything ordinary in a way that felt almost unfamiliar after what had just happened, and I realized something as I walked, that the real test had not been at the grave, it had been here, in the space where no one was watching, where there was no stone, no name, no witness to hold me accountable except the choice I made next. I slowed my pace slightly and felt it immediately, Rex adjusting with me, matching the change without hesitation, and I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, because that small, simple shift meant more than anything else. It meant he was paying attention not just to where I was going, but how I was getting there, and I wondered if that was what Jack had understood all along, that being followed was not about leading, it was about consistency, about showing up the same way every time until trust became something that did not need to be questioned. I reached the edge of the street where my car was parked, the same place I had left it what felt like hours ago but now seemed like a different lifetime. I stopped there, not opening the door, not breaking the moment too quickly, and I turned slightly, looking down at Rex, his coat still damp, his posture steady despite the miles he must have carried in silence. "I am going to come back," I said again, not for him this time, but for myself, because I needed to hear it out loud, needed to know that it was not just something I felt in that cemetery, but something that would follow me beyond it. He did not react the way people do. There was no visible sign, no sudden change, just that same steady gaze, that same quiet presence, and I understood that this was how it would be, not earned in a moment, not proven in a single day, but built over time in choices no one else would see. I opened the car door slowly, the sound soft against the quiet street, and for a second I hesitated again because this was another line, another place where it would be easy to move on without looking back. I stepped aside instead, leaving the door open, not calling him, not signaling, just creating space, and I waited, the silence stretching just enough to remind me that nothing about this would ever be automatic. Then, after a moment that felt longer than it was, Rex moved forward, slow, deliberate, stepping past me and pausing beside the open door. Not getting in, not committing, just standing there, watching, and I felt it again, that quiet understanding settling into place. This was not the end of anything, not even close. It was a question that would not be answered today or tomorrow, but over time, in every step I took from here on out, I rested my hand lightly on the edge of the door and looked at him, not expecting, not demanding, just present. And as the wind moved gently down the street and the last of the rain faded into nothing, I realized that the life I walked back into would not be the same as the one I had left, because now every choice carried weight, every step carried memory, and every return would matter more than the first. And as Rex stood there beside me, not fully following, not fully staying, I understood the truth that would define everything that came next, that gratitude was not something you say once, it was something you lived, and whether he would walk with me or turn back toward that grave was not up to him alone, it was up to who I chose to become from this moment on.